Excellent. Can you hear me well? Welcome. Great to see all of you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Paul, for the overview of Workday. I'm excited to take you further down this journey. So I'll start with a couple things. The first one is this safe harbor statement. I expect all of you to read this from top to bottom and understand. No, I'm just kidding. This just says if I talk about futures at all in this presentation, you should make your buying decisions based on current functionality. So I'm happy to be here at Elevate in Korea. As I was introduced, I'm Dave Sohigian, the Global CTO with Workday. I've been with Workday for 13 years now and have traveled around the globe presenting about Workday and listening to our customers. But I have to say, it's my first time in Korea. I've never been to Korea before in my life. I'm very excited to be here. I'll have some time tomorrow to be able to explore a little bit. And Korea, of course, has been so influential, even in the United States, in terms of culture as well. And I was very excited yesterday when I arrived at the airport, but perhaps a little nervous when this guy stopped to pick me up. It worked out okay. So let's talk about the hype. This is something that Paul referred to in his presentation as well. There's a lot of hype right now, and there's hype around a particular topic. So you may or may not be aware of Google Trends. That's a part of Google where you can do searches for specific terms to see how popular that search has been over time, anywhere in the world. And so here's an example of some trends. This is from March of 2022, and then you can see here in November, these two terms spiked. And what are those? One is AI, and the other is ChatGPT. And why is this? What happened? Well, with ChatGPT, in November of last year, they released version 3.5 to the public. And all of a sudden, people were able to try it out. And then right after that, the New York Times released an article in the United States about this. And all of your CEOs found out that ChatGPT was something that they could use. And they got very excited about it, or very nervous, or both. And so because of that, it created a media frenzy around ChatGPT and AI. I can say at Workday, we were very excited about that as well. And we'll talk about why. But first, I want to point out something that you may have heard of, and this is called the hype cycle. It's something that Gartner produces, and every year they give where technologies are on this hype cycle. The idea is this right here is the peak of expectations, when everybody thinks, oh, this will change the world. And then here is where we end up sometime after. This is called the trough of disillusionment. And then here, when everybody realizes that maybe it may not do that. And then this is the plateau. And it doesn't matter when this, it's not how quickly things move through this, and it's not a chart of a specific technology, but it's the idea that things get to this height, this top level. And that's where we are right now with AI and ML. It's been climbing that for a while, but shot up to the top because of ChatGPT. And the question is, what of all of this hype really matters? What is the productivity that we will gain from it? So let's talk about machine learning, and we'll get to a little more details about machine learning. So first, I'll mention hallucinations, which is something that Paul brought up. You may or may not be aware of hallucinations and what this means, but when you talk about hallucinations, especially for tools like ChatGPT, it's describing how these tools often, when you ask them questions, like a chatbot, you ask it a question, it will respond with information that's not accurate, but it will respond in a very, very confident way. It's almost as if these applications are, well, American. That's, but so where do these hallucinations come from? A hallucination. So I decided to ask ChatGPT, why does it have hallucinations? And when I asked that question, it said, despite the vastness of the data set, inconsistent or inaccurate training data sources can lead ChatGPT to generate hallucinations or inaccurate responses. So it's a huge data set. That's really good. As Paul was talking about, having lots of data is really valuable. But the challenge is that if the data is inconsistent and inaccurate, it makes it really challenging for it to know what is the truth. So the data set for ChatGPT specifically is all of the internet up to 2021. That's a lot of data. That's really good. But it's also got a lot of data that is not accurate. So if you look at ChatGPT, they list for some of the websites that they consider the most valuable for the information that they produce in their application. The number one application or website that they use to get data from is Wikipedia. So think about it. Wikipedia is their number one site. Think back 10, maybe 15 years when you talk to your children about Wikipedia. What did you say about it? You said, don't trust it. It's not accurate information. It's just entered in by people. That is the most valuable source of information they have, and it sort of goes downhill from there. So because of this, it points out that for machine learning that doesn't have these hallucinations, you need a huge data set for sure, and that's something that Workday has. And as Paul mentioned, we have 60 million plus users, and today we're running at about 3.1 billion transactions per day. This is a massive data set that we have. So like ChatGPT, we have a lot of data. But the difference is, when it comes to those consistencies, we are the system of record for all of the transactions that are carried out in Workday. So it is not a survey or somebody's opinion that is going into the Workday system. It is the system of record for how much your employee is paid, who their beneficiaries are. All of that data, the financial records, all of that is being entered into Workday as the source. And so it's a very accurate data set. And then finally, there's also having a uniform data model. And this is something that Paul mentioned, and I mean something very specific by a uniform data model. Every single Workday customer has the same data model. So think about for a moment, in your current system that you use for HR or for finance, look across the table and look at somebody else at your table, and do you think they have the same data model as you do? Is the structure of the data in their HR system the same as yours? It contains different data, but even the structure is different. Raise your hand if you work for a Workday customer. Any? Do we have any customers? No? Yeah, 1, 2? How many people are just uncomfortable raising their hand? Is that, yeah? Raise your hand. No? So, if every single customer of Workday in here, you all have the same data model, the structure of the data is exactly the same. So, why does that matter? Well, it matters because, can you make sense of this data? Can anybody tell me what this represents? I know it's in English, kind of. Yeah? But if I put structure to it, now you can see employee name, date of birth, gender, address. This is an employee record, and it's easy to see that. Machine learning is no different than us in terms of being able to make sense of data. It can make sense of large data sets that are confusing. We can too, but it takes time. It's more effort. If it is structured, it performs much better. So let's talk about machine learning, because I think one of the challenges that you run into with any new technology that is on the hype cycle is that it sort of appears like magic. It seems like it's doing something magical. When I first got this phone and unfolded it and saw that the screen could bend, it seemed like magic, right? But it isn't. It's just a technology. And that's the same with machine learning. So let's start. I will describe how most machine learning works. So you start with, actually, your phone is a good example of an application that you can think of. I would suspect most of you use some sort of mapping application. In the US, we use Google Maps or Waze to be able to navigate around. So let's use that as an example. So a navigation app that you're using, how do they do that? Well, first they start with training data, and they put that training data together with an algorithm. The algorithm is the processing engine that makes sense of it. And then from that, they create what's called a model. And that model combines both the data that they took in of all the streets in Seoul and how they're organized, and put that together inside of this algorithm so it could do processing. And then that model can be used against live data. And the live data in this example would be, I want to drive from my home down to the conference center. So that's the request that you're making. And it runs it against that model, and from that, it can make a prediction of, here's the best path to drive. That's the basis of machine learning, but there's a piece missing from this. And that piece turns out to be the most important part, and that's the outcome. And it's an example of maps. The outcome is, did you get there? How long did it take? Were you stuck in traffic? And it turns out with any of the applications you use for navigating, for mapping, they're constantly tracking you. Why? Why are they tracking where you're going? Because they want this outcome data, because they can use that to feed in as training data. The reason why you can see why there's traffic on a side street here in Seoul is because everybody who drove down that street just minutes before you was being tracked. And that feeds in as training data, which then enhances the model, which then makes better predictions. So this, it turns out, is one of the most important parts to good machine learning, is having access to the outcomes, to what happens. So why do I point this out, that this is the most critical piece? Well, it's because Workday has a huge advantage there that we were already talking about. We have something called the ISA that we have our customers sign. The ISA is a legal agreement that says you're willing to share data, like these outcomes, for the purposes of machine learning. And I'll get into a little more detail on how that works as well. Over 82% of our customers have signed the ISA. That shows that they have a tremendous amount of trust in Workday to do good things with their data and to keep it secure. And as was mentioned before, we have over 60 million plus users of the Workday system. So a huge data set and access to all of those outcomes. This is what sets Workday apart and gives us a huge advantage. The other thing I will say about this is, although many companies started very recently on their machine learning journey, Workday started with our architecture 18 years ago. Having a uniform data model, having all the data in our data centers accessible, that's something we've had since the very beginning. And that's what makes really powerful machine learning work. So you saw this before, you don't need to take pictures of this, we'll give you copies of the slides. Normally in the US, I would start with this slide and show, oh, here's all the machine learning things you do. Here, I would rather first talk about the background of why it's so powerful. So we continue to add more and more applications that use machine learning embedded into the system. And it's because of that foundation we have that we know, we have confidence that those will be very powerful applications. So I do want to spend a minute on the ISA. I think for many companies, they are concerned about, oh, I share my data with other customers. How does that work? I'm concerned about the security of my data. So when we're driving these different functions that are all examples of machine learning, we start at the top, and we start with your tenanted data. And your tenanted data is the data you own. In our agreements, it says clearly, you own this data, we don't. That's the start of the source. And then we have the ISA data, which is the data that is defined in the ISA that we might use for purposes of things like machine learning. So that's not all of your data, it's just the things that would drive machine learning. And then the next level is the services you, as a customer, decide to turn on. So signing up with Workday doesn't share any of your data. Signing the ISA does not share any of your data. You get to decide, once you do those things, which pieces of data you'll share. And that is all based on the services you want to use. So if you want to use the Skills Cloud, you have to share your skills data. It's very specific to the function that you're trying to use machine learning for. So, and this is all under your customer control. So we feed this data into the machine learning environment. So this is all the ML environment here. And it can do things like anomaly detection, the people experience, having it personalized to each user. Those are examples of where we use your data to be able to make a better experience based on just the data from your company. But there's even bigger examples where we can feed that in and share it with other customer data as well. And this pooled data that's grouped together is used for things like skills, optical character recognition for expenses and invoice tracking, and then also benchmarks. So when we bring that data together, the key piece here is that each customer only gets access to the results from these models. So even though we're putting all the data together here, you don't, as a customer, you don't see that. You see the results from the models. Going back to the idea of the navigation, if you see traffic on a side street that you're going down, it doesn't mean you know who drove there. You have no insight into that. It's the same with this. The result that you're getting is, the benefit is from all of the customers that have shared their data, but what you see is doesn't give you any insights into them, so it's kept private. The other piece, because we've been doing this for a very long time, and because our services have been in the cloud since we began, is we're very concerned about ethical AI and bias. I know there's many issues with machine learning environments like ChatGPT, giving inaccurate results, but also capturing data, right? I know that there's companies here in Korea that have decided to not allow the use of ChatGPT because they're worried about data being captured. So these are things we think about from the very beginning, because we only serve large customers like yourselves. So Workday, we strive to identify, address, and mitigate bias in our ML technologies. That's part of our ethics commitment, and we have a whole statement on that. And we have a whole team that is constantly evaluating for this new capability, is it ethical for us to use machine learning? Does it introduce bias? And that's something we have a whole team that evaluates, not only when we first propose new capabilities, but then over time as the situation changes. So I want to give you one more brief here on the skills graph and talk, again, this is more the background. We saw from Paul the idea, and heard from Paul the idea of what it can do for you, and it is really powerful, but I want to talk for a moment about how we built it and the advantages we have with it. So let's think about what the skills graph is. So in my organization, we call it the skills graph. In marketing calls it the skills cloud. It's the same thing. But you'll see why we call it a graph when I go through this. So imagine a graph, a chart, where you have the industry here and the job you're trying to fulfill here. And you could say there's a group of skills, like knowledge of cloud applications, software as a service, software. These are grouped together, right? These are things that relate to each other. They're skills that many people at Workday would have, for example. We might add in another set of skills, like negotiation, contracts, sales, prospecting. Salespeople have those skills. These skills may not be close to each other. They may not be closely related, and we can say they're close that group and that group are close, but they may be distant from each other. So this is just 2 dimensions. What if I added a 3rd dimension to this? CRM, ERP, financials, HCM. So these are all the type of applications that Workday develops. Those, again, by region, may be very far from the other ones. But this is a very simple chart I've created. This has just a dozen skills and 3 dimensions. Imagine if instead we were to have 300 plus dimensions, which is exactly what Workday has in the Workday Skills Cloud. 300 different dimensions, including the ones you see here, but many other ones that define how you can organize those skills. And instead of just a dozen skills, you have 55,000 plus skills. That's what's in the Workday system for understanding skills. And this means that instead of just a list of skills that you could look through and say, I have this skill, or this degree gives you that skill, it's much more sophisticated than that. And you can look across all these different dimensions to be able to determine what are the skills you need. We often say that skills, when they're applied this way, are the currency of human resources. They're the way you understand the value that employees can bring when you have this level of understanding. So, for example, how would you use this? Let's start with a worker inside of Workday. And again, everybody who has Workday, the worker is the definition of a person who works for your company. That worker might have perhaps a job that they're associated with, that they're connected to. And in that job, they have to have certain skills. So there's skills associated with the job and with the worker themselves based on their background and experience. What if the job requires a skill that they don't have? Well, that's a skills gap, right? And that's something we commonly know, but with the Skills Cloud, you can start to identify that. You can start to see when there's skills gaps between the job and the worker. There's also something called gigs, where a worker could have a gig, which is just a project that they work on, that's something built into Workday. So perhaps there's certain skills that this worker has that when you post a gig inside of Workday, we can match it up with them and say, you might be interested in doing this project. Or even, in some ways more interesting, perhaps the job that they normally do requires a skill that they can learn by doing one of those temporary projects to fill that skills gap. They can also fill that skills gap by doing training, because we can do analysis of all the text from lessons, whether it's written or audio text. We can analyze what skills are being taught. So if you have a skills gap, you can do certain training, and we can recommend that training to you. It continues from there. What specific lessons should I look at? Who, perhaps, should I have as a mentor, because they have the skills that I need to get? And if you're looking at succession, I'm a worker, I want to move up in the organization, you can look at all of these things to say, what do you need to do? What are the skills required for that next job that you need? How do you acquire that? With a mentor, with training, with doing gigs. So it pulls together all of these concepts. And the reason why Workday has an advantage here goes back to this model. So you remember this model, right? How did we train the Skills Cloud? It started with training data. The training data is something called ONET, which is a publicly available list of skills. 400,000 plus skills. It's just a huge list. And it's of every skill you could imagine. But then we process that through an algorithm using something called web crawl, which is just what it sounds like. It crawls out on the web, and we looked for the words, the skills, and saw where are they together. There's a job posting. Oh, those are close together. So we started to understand a little bit about here's what the shape of the skills should be. But then, more importantly, we went to our customers, and we asked our customers, to give us their outcomes. What does their data tell us about these skills? What does it tell us about how they're related? And that's how we were able to create the 300 plus dimensions. And you notice this number is much bigger, right? 400,000 skills. We got it down to 55,000 skills because many of the skills are the same. They're just different names for the same thing. And we were able to do all of that by using our customers' data that they shared with us over time. And they continue to do this. So as we have more and more global companies that are using the Skills Cloud, they're sharing their data, and we can refine for all customers how skills are shown inside the application. So this is a good example of all that background that I was talking about how we built it that way. The Skills Cloud is a good example of what that means for you as a customer. So I think that's all I have for today, and we have a break next. Is that correct? Or is it? Yes? No? Is it a break next? No soon?